Hello there, my friends. Welcome to the Forgotten Trimester YouTube channel, where we talk about all things postpartum and motherhood, from recovery to relationships, breastfeeding, to integrating career into motherhood, and everything in between. I am Dr. Megan Gray. I am a board-certified practicing OBGYN and mother of 2 little ones. On this episode, we are chatting about the new American Academy of Pediatrics breastfeeding guidelines and what that means for your breastfeeding journey. So let's dive right in. So the American Academy of Pediatrics just came out with new recommendations on breastfeeding for women in the United States. Number 1, which hasn't really changed from their previous recommendations, is exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months. So that means breast milk only for the first 6 months. The second recommendation, which is the new one, is to introduce foods at 6 months, which that really isn't the part that changed. But then in continued breastfeeding for 2 years or beyond, as long as desired by mother and baby. So that part of the recommendation is very important to hear, because it's often left out in the media, is that the recommendation states breastfeeding for 2 years or beyond, as long as desired by mother and baby. So this recommendation is pretty consistent with the World Health Organization's recommendation, which the World Health Organization is an organization that kind of gives guidelines and recommendations for second and third world countries. So in those countries, a lot of times there are not great food options that are nutritious for little children. So that's why they tend to recommend breastfeeding for 2 years or beyond. So let's talk about some of the realities of breastfeeding. Number 1, breastfeeding is natural. We know, yes. So we are all mammals. Humans are mammals. There are many other mammals in our world, and we all breastfeed. But that does not mean that it's easy. Breastfeeding does not always come easily for everyone. Now, there are groups of people where breastfeeding is super easy. They latch the baby immediately. The baby latches and is fine for the rest of the breastfeeding journey. And then there are people that struggle tremendously with breastfeeding, and there are people in the middle where they struggle initially and then they figure it out and it becomes easy for them. So just because it's natural does not mean it is easy. Number 2, it is a learned behavior. Like, the mechanics of breastfeeding are learned. It is teachable, and the baby has to learn how to breastfeed, and the mommy has to learn how to breastfeed. There are things like the latch, how the baby latches onto the nipple, the hold, how mommy holds the baby during breastfeeding. Learning hunger cues, early hunger cues in your newborn are all super helpful in the mechanics of breastfeeding. And then understanding how breastfeeding works, it works on a demand supply. So the more you demand, especially at the beginning of your breastfeeding journey, the more your body will produce supply. Then number 3 that I think we always forget to tell people is that not every woman will be able to breastfeed, and not every baby will be able to breastfeed, and that's okay. That's why we have formula. That's why we have other options. Just because it's natural, it does not mean that everybody can do it. For a variety of reasons. It might be the woman does not have enough breast tissue that produces milk, or the nipples are misshapen, or the baby has tongue tie, or something occurred during the labor and delivery process that makes breast milk production more difficult. There are a ton of reasons why some people cannot breastfeed, and that does not mean you are defective or you're faulty or you're a failure. Breastfeeding is not for everyone. We do know it's the ideal way to feed a baby, but it is not the only way, and no one should ever feel guilty about how they choose to nourish their baby. So let's talk about some of the mindsets surrounding your breastfeeding journey. Number 1, just to kind of follow up on that last statement, you get to choose how you want to nourish your baby. And it really is based on what you're comfortable with, what your baby's comfortable with, what your family dynamics are involved. So I know there's a lot of outside noise, and you will hear everybody has an opinion about how you should feed your baby, but ultimately the decision is yours, and you get to make that decision. And when you make that decision, know that decision that you've made is the best decision for you and for your baby, and just rest assured that that is the right decision. Number 2, like we talked about, it is learned. You have to spend some time doing it. Now, you might get lucky. Some people get lucky and it's super easy and there's really not a whole learning curve to it. But I would say a majority of people, there is a learning curve, and that's normal. It's just like riding a bike or learning how to walk. I mean, somebody has to be there to help you. And so not only does this take education, so reaching out to a lactation consultant who is highly educated in breastfeeding, and they are super helpful. And understanding that, your personality doesn't necessarily jive with every single person's personality. So if you find a lactation consultant and it doesn't seem like the right fit, find someone else. It's okay. Not everybody is meant to work with each individual person. Okay. So don't feel guilty if you have to seek other help, but seek other help. If it's not working for you, find someone else. Number 2, this takes patience. Breastfeeding takes a ton of patience, unless you're one of the lucky ones where it's super easy. But just like riding a bike, it takes a ton of patience as you learn, as you grow, as your baby learns and grows. You guys are learning a new skill together. It takes a lot of grace. So be patient with yourself. Give yourself grace. It doesn't come automatically. It doesn't always come easy. It takes time to figure it out. It takes time for your milk to come in. I mean, the first couple days you're just producing colostrum, which is enough for your baby. But it takes 3 to 5 days after birth for even that more transitional milk, that thinner, whiter milk to come in. So all of this is a process, and it takes time and it takes grace. Give yourself that grace. You deserve it. You're working hard. You're doing something you've never done before. And then number 3, try to avoid thinking in absolutes. I think we all tend to think in this whole black and white kind of picture. So the idea that I'm only successful at breastfeeding if I'm exclusively breastfeeding, or I'm only successful at breastfeeding if I breastfeed for a full year exclusively, or I'm only successful at breastfeeding if I don't introduce foods until 6 months and then breastfeed for 2 years, like the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests. Life is not an absolute, right? We all know that. We all know walking through life, there's no absolute. So avoid thinking that with your breastfeeding journey. If you are able to exclusively breastfeed your baby for 1 to 2 years, or at least 6 months, and then introduce foods and then continue breastfeeding for 1 year to 2 years, amazing. You're amazing. That's amazing. But any amount of breastfeeding or breast milk in general is better than nothing at all. Okay. So even if you're unable to exclusively breastfeed, but you're able to pump a couple ounces a day, or you're able to latch the baby a couple times a day, that is amazing. Okay. And you should never, ever feel like you're a failure, because you're not. And even the smallest amount of breast milk is helpful for the baby. Okay. So avoid that black and white, that if I don't do it just as I've been told, then I've failed, or I'm lacking, or the baby's not going to be as healthy or successful as they could have been if they were breastfed exclusively. So that kind of wraps it up for this episode. I hope I shed some light on breastfeeding and what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations are. It really is leaving it up to you. I think the whole premise behind it was to gain support for people that choose to breastfeed longer. Especially in American society where breastfeeding hasn't been as well received as in other countries. But we are breaking some of the barriers down, so that's great, and we will continue to do that in the future. So thanks for joining in today. Certainly, if you like the content, I'd love for you to subscribe, give me a thumbs up. Tell your friends, tell your family. I love to educate people. Certainly, if you have any comments or questions or any topics that you want to hear, please leave them in the comments. I'll be glad to speak on any kind of topics that come up. And if you're not already following me on Instagram, please follow me on Instagram. I do a lot of teaching there. It's just Forgotten Trimester on Instagram. So otherwise, I'll see you next week, next topic. Bye.